Now being recorded.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming. We have a guest today, but our guest like to introduce himself. And would our guest like to take himself off of mute and then reintroduce himself? You're still on mute.
Mr. Zuckerberg, I'll unmute you. There you go. I tried to. Just press the little microphone with the capacitor. There you go.
There you are. So good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to participate. I'm Alan Zuckerberg. I'm an attorney, but the main reason that I'm here is I'm also the president of the Pikesville Communities Corporation. Well, I guess the main reason I'm here is also I'm looking to support a potential political candidate, and that's probably what's on the tape. One of the things on your agenda, I think today, is a question that I asked Kelly, and then I'll be asking a lot more in the near future that pertains to my activities as an unpaid president of a coalition of community associations and how my actions would be regarded under the ethics law. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us, and thank you for giving us that background. So I would like to know if we have a motion to start here. Do we? And is there a second?
I second.
Okay, so we are on the record at 3:03 p.m. on May 4th, 2021. Everybody should have received a copy of the open minutes from our last meeting, which was April the 6th, 2021, and I assume everyone has had a chance to review them. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Mike has moved to approve. I think Mike is speaking, although he is on mute. And he is still on mute.
Fine. I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of April 6th.
Thank you, Michael. Is there a second?
I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and the motion passes. We can move on now to the executive director report. Kelly?
Yes, I'm happy to go through my spiel. I'm also happy to take Mr. Zuckerberg first. Mr. Zuckerberg, if you wanted to present to the commission, and then you can, that would be kind of the end of your business, although you're welcome to stay. It's up to, if you're, I just wanted to give you the option of going first.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So what I am presenting to the commission is this factual scenario. I have a person that may consider running for a county office, an elected office, and he is a licensed attorney with the Court of Appeals of Maryland. And the question is if he is elected to the county council, will he still be able to maintain his private practice of representing clients who buy at county tax sales? Or would that be a conflict or in violation of the ethics laws?
Mr. Zuckerberg, while you're here, if you wouldn't mind just giving the commission any other factual information that you think they might want. I know you and I, when you called and we spoke, I think it was last week or the week before, you talked kind of about what the role of an attorney is in the tax sale, just so that they'll have some factual background on this question.
Thank you. He's the practitioner. I've been peripherally involved in potentially being involved in as a buyer in a tax sale, which I did not go through with. But my understanding is that at some point in time, when a property owner does not pay his or her taxes, that after notice, advertising and notice, and perhaps even written notice, but certainly in the newspaper, you've probably seen pages and pages of properties put in for tax sale. And at some point in time, there's bidding that takes place. Now I understand it's all online. And if the buyer is, if a particular buyer, in this instance, this particular attorney's client buys a certificate from the county tax office, then the attorney, this attorney would eventually order a title examination and eventually file a lawsuit in the circuit court for Baltimore County to foreclose the property owner's rights and seek a order of the circuit court to do so. And eventually, if that's successful, he would also, he would go through with the preparing a deed and having it filed in the circuit court, the county land records at the circuit court for Baltimore County. If he's not successful, or I put it another way, if the property owner communicates with this attorney and says, I want to redeem the certificate, the property owner has to pay a redemption price plus accrued attorney's fees and interest on the price. And that the attorney is still representing the same client, his buyer, in getting those funds and then giving the certificate back, or however that mechanic works, where he no longer goes forward with trying to foreclose the title. So that's pretty much what I think. And just to point out a few things, so he's representing a private client. He may even perhaps even bid on behalf of the client in the tax sale action that's online. But it's a private client, and it's all held through the courts, and it's pretty much there's no interplay that I'm aware of between the attorney, who would be then an elected official, and the county tax office, other than perhaps they ask the same questions that anyone else is entitled to ask. There's no influence that I can imagine that could be used in his or her position as a elected official in the county council. It's all pretty straightforward and controlled by statute.
This is, can I ask a question? Sorry. I assume the fees are set by statute. They're not contingent. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
The only other thing I wanted to clarify, Mr. Zuckerberg, I think because we brought this, you and I talked about this in our telephone call, that it's not necessarily an adversarial process. Is that fair to say?
That's my understanding. It's certainly not adversarial between the elected official and the county. At least that's my understanding. It's a procedure. You go through it, eventually you file a petition. You have to wait a certain period of time. You file a petition to foreclose. I guess it's called the right of redemption in this situation. But it's a foreclosure of the title owner's property rights. And you have to follow the statutory, the whole method that's provided by statute. And I don't think you can vary from it. You have to notify, I think he causes a title examination to be done and notifies the party whose title may be affected, as well as let's say the owner or occupier, homeowner of the home, anybody else in the chain of title, I would assume a mortgagee or mortgagees, and perhaps even other tax liens like federal tax liens. I'm not sure about that part of the process, but I would assume that's part of it.
Mr. Zuckerberg,
Go
I have a
ahead.
question. You referred to representing a private client. I don't know that this matters to the analysis, but just so I know the answer, in case it does. It is my understanding that some people who do this, some attorneys who do this, not only represent other people, but also sometimes are themselves the principal bidding, or perhaps either in their individual capacity, or else perhaps they are the owner or one of the owners of an entity, which is the bidding person. You've referred, however, to this gentleman as representing a private client. Is it your understanding that that is what he does, as opposed to being one of these people who sometimes is doing this for himself or for an entity which he is a principal or sole owner of?
Yes, that is my understanding. However, I think it's safer to make the assumption that in case he represents himself and or an entity in which he has an interest in, a financial interest in, I prefer that it be expanded to include that in the analysis. And so that's a good question, and I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't asked them specifically, but that is something I think should be included.
Does anybody have any more questions for Mr. Zuckerberg?
I have a few questions. Hi, Mr. Zuckerberg. My
Hello.
name is Lisa Tancredi.
Nice to meet you.
And maybe this question isn't for you, but it might be a question for Ms. Durbin or Ms. Madigan. And that is, does the county council have any role in determining what properties are listed for tax sale?
No, it's strictly based on non-payment of taxes.
And would the county council have access to information about what properties are going to be sold at tax sale before the general public would have that information?
That I'm not sure of. I know we circulate a list to county agencies to see if there's any properties that should be pulled from the tax sale. I don't know that that list goes to council, but we could check that out.
And along the same lines, does county council have access to information that the public does not have with respect to any of these properties that go?
I don't believe so.
If I may, it's my understanding that the way the process works now is that people who are interested in purchasing at the tax sale have to apply and be accepted by the county to bid. Persons
It's a registration process. That's correct.
and that and you can't bid until it's open to the public. The bidding is open to the public. That's my understanding.
Is there any subjectivity in the registration process?
No,
Okay.
no. I mean, they either meet the qualifications or they don't. I mean, we publish a notice that says this is what you have to do. If you're in arrears to the county, you can't register. But other than that, you know, it's a very simple process to register, and there's no subjectivity. There's no subjectivity to the bidding process.
And do we have a sense of sort of the percentage of this person's practice that is tax sale related?
I'm going to guess I can only use the word substantial. I did not, sorry for that phone. I can mute myself for a minute. If you hold, excuse me for just a little bit. I'm going to say that it's a substantial part of his practice. Otherwise, he wouldn't be asking the question.
Okay.
Because if the commission says it's a conflict and it violates the ethics law, then there's no further consideration of his running for office. So it's got to be a major part of his practice.
Okay. And I guess I was just trying to think if there's any possibility of any scenario where the county would be adverse to his client. I mean, I understand it's, you know, you would be adverse to the current owner of the property whose interest was being sold or foreclosed upon. But I was just trying to think through, is there any possibility that there could be an interest that's adverse to the county?
The only time that comes up is if someone is the successful bidder and then fails to follow through. And, you know, sometimes we get into a little bit of a contentious discussion, but that would, you know, that would be with the owner, not necessarily with the attorney. So,
You mean with with the Office of Law?
well, with the finance office.
They're trying to
But
get
it
their
would be- it
deposit
would-
back.
Yeah, because they often have a high bid premium and they want their money back. But usually, you know, the attorney is representing somebody else. So,
Doesn't the bidder have to pay the high bid premium? That's
right,
before he gets the tax certificate?
right. But then they have to go through the process of filing the foreclosure of rights of redemption in court. And that's where sometimes they fail to follow through and they just sort of let the certificate lapse.
But, okay, so I'm assuming that under their circumstances that it would be the client who would
Right.
be subject to whatever may be. And if the lawyer has no personal interest, then the lawyer would not be subject to anything. And that would be between the finance office and the buyer, you're saying, Susan?
Yes,
Okay. Or the attorney may be involved, and I guess you're
Right.
perhaps raising the specter of, will the finance office give
his
the
client.
elected
back.
official some kind of a break?
Yep. Yeah, occasionally we get questions like that.
I would think that the procedure is pretty standard across the board, regardless of who the finance office says didn't follow through with the
Right.
purchase.
Yeah, this is one that the process is pretty well set out in statute. It's doesn't get deviated from.
And then I think this question has already been answered, and I'm sorry if I didn't catch it. Are the attorney's fees established by statute?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I thought that was the case.
Any more questions for Mr. Zuckerberg? Okay, well, Mr. Zuckerberg, it was a pleasure to have you. Feel free to come anytime. I think you know we meet on the first Tuesday of the month. I'm always happy to send you the WebEx invite.
I appreciate that. I think, if I may, as I said, I'm also the president of I'm not paid. It's a nonprofit. It's a 501c4 community organization. It's a coalition of homeowner associations. And I get involved often with writing to elected officials, particularly in the Baltimore County Council, or particularly the council person from the 2nd District. And in that regard, I advocate, I take positions for and against legislation. I'm going to be sending you an example of a current resolution for a PUD. And it's going to be, I'll be asking for detailed questions, which I think the answers not only apply to me, but other community, I hate to use the word activist because I don't like it, but that's what they refer to me sometimes, and sometimes even more demeaning, they call me a gadfly. But I would like to get these questions answered. I have filed, I have registered, and I have filed reports. But and I also am concerned about the wording of the registration and particularly the wording of the reporting form. So it's my
I just want to interrupt you a minute to give the commission member's background that you're talking. Mr. Zuckerberg and I spoke about the idea that he should register as a lobbyist with the commission based on the fact that he writes letters. And I thought that out of an abundance of caution, there was no harm in registering because he met the definition of, I think it was B1. And he and I have talked about some of the pros and cons with both the registration form as well as the activity reports that we both hope will be online next year. I got to move around. My light keeps going off.
Well, one of my concerns is the distinction in how I read the lobbying law that talks about, I believe the first part, I don't have the law in front of me, talks about And I think it requires in-person communication with the
Right.
official.
Right, we
The
talked about the
second-
fact that there's two, right?
Yeah, the second part is what's disturbing to me. And that I believe that refers to whether I communicate with the official and not in person, like email or telephone or fax. And or I ask the public, the members of my coalition or the public generally to communicate with the elected official. And I'll be asking if you will make a distinction when you see what I write between, is there a difference between me asking the public generally to communicate with the public official? And is there a difference in that regard if I ask them to communicate in person or I don't mention how I'd like them to communicate? You see, so to me, the way I read the law is that a lot of this all deals with in-person communication so that the white envelope doesn't pass. And because I'm sure we all know the history of Baltimore County. And then other components of my questions will be such things as if we invite the council person to if we have in-person meetings again. I happen to like the way we've been doing it over the pandemic and not in person. But if we have in-person meetings again, and I have 10 directors sitting in the room with the councilman and his legislative assistant and a senator or a delegate or whatever, and would that make it be in state law? Is that in person enough? Is that just enough that I have to report, and does that require the other sitting directors who are in the room to have to report if they start advocating on in a particular matter? So I'm going to be asking all these questions, and I'm going to tell you in advance, I appreciate anything that you can do to address them, to give clarity to not only me, but to other people in my position throughout the county. So thank you for allowing me to be here today, and thanks for your work.
You're welcome, Mr. Zuckerberg. You're welcome anytime.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna leave now. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. Kelly, would you like to continue with your report?
Sure. So I'll be pretty quick because I know we have other things on the agenda. The online course, which is the 20 to 25-minute ethics course that I'm rolling out for every department as part of this kind of broader education for ethics, has now 2,092 employees have taken and been certified in the course as of when I ran the statistics last week. The goal is to try to get somewhere close to the 8,000 employees. Not everybody has an email address, but my hope by August is that it will have been rolled out to each and every agency, some basic ethics trainings, and then I can, think about updating the course every year and just kind of have that be a nice complement to the live training. So we're still doing the monthly trainings for boards and commissions. Last month, I think I did, nope, I didn't do one last month. The online financial disclosure program has kind of been a nightmare. To be perfectly candid, it has been a real challenge. While we have 360 some odd people that have filed, as of today, I'm missing approximately 16 from current employees. I have about 20 from employees that were designated as filers and have since left the county. Those are going to be extremely difficult to track down. And I think there's about 16 or 17 from current board members. There's also, as I think you guys are aware, there was the challenge not only with it being online, which was a learning curve for a lot of individuals. There was the challenge with the form looked slightly different this year. Some of the language, I've gotten some good feedback on tweaks for how to kind of make it better. And then there was also the challenge that only Form 1 was online, not Form 2, which is the form that you and some other boards and commission members file. I totaled up approximately 78 people filed online with Form 1 as if it was Form 2. I think it would be very helpful for the commission in concert with the Office of Law to issue guidance on a couple of different areas that have come about with this financial disclosure. And the other thing, and I guess I'll kind of ask Sue what she thinks about this because I'm not really sure. I don't know if these are real issues that need to be addressed, or these are people complaining because they're doing the financial disclosure at the time. But there's obviously a lot of consternation about Schedule B, which is the financial interest, and what does and does not fall. I think it would be extremely helpful for the commission to kind of have a laundry list of like 520, or I don't know what they are, 529 college saving plans, not an interest, mutual funds, interest, CDs, money markets, not an interest, just kind of a list. I get a lot of questions about that. I talk about control over the idea if you, Laura, have 10 shares of Apple stock as opposed to you, Laura, have 10 shares in a mutual fund, somebody else is controlling it. There's kind of also this broader concept with, is this really the type of information that is relevant on a day-to-day basis? Because given how stocks are now and money market and things are now, I mean, even if Laura had 10 shares of Apple, her having the ability to give or not give a contract to somebody, I don't know. That's kind of a broader question. The other thing I think would be helpful for guidance from the commission is about gifts. And the idea that if you have a friend, a neighbor, somebody you work with that asks you out to lunch, that's technically a gift. There's some gifts that are permitted under the code, but they're still gifts. And if you're going to a baseball game, to golf, to fishing, to an event, to whatever, those are gifts. I think kind of a laundry list or some guidance on that would be helpful. There's also been a lot of questions about dependent children. One of the schedules is, do your children work for Baltimore County? Never really made sense to me, and again, I'll defer to Sue on this because our laws are based off of the state. So, like, I don't think we should do anything crazy because our law is based on the state law, and that makes sense. But it only asks about chronology going down. So it doesn't ask, in the same vein, if your parent works for Baltimore County. It only asks if you have a child that works. I don't know. I think that would be helpful. And then obviously, Mr. Zuckerberg has called and has his opinion. So that's my executive director's report. I'm happy to talk about these kind of issues in open session. Some of them I think are probably more appropriate for closed session, but that's kind of my laundry list of things to report back to the commission.
So does no one have any questions for Kelly?
Okay.
Kelly, are you looking for any specific feedback from the commission?
I think it would be helpful to get a letter of support from the commission generally to help get Form 2 online sooner than later. I think it would be helpful for a letter of support from the commission to also get the form for, I mean, this has been a challenge to try to take something that's been paper and put it online. We need not only Form 2, which is extremely important for those people that potentially over-disclose, and we would redact that if somebody made a request.
Right.
But I'm also concerned that for the last 5 months, you know, anyone that has been leaving Baltimore County government or a board or commission has to file a form for 2021. And so at some point, we're going to need to like have this all kind of catch up. I think it would be helpful to kind of maybe, I don't know, Sue, I'll defer to you. Again, I have plenty of work. I don't need to focus on this if it's not a thing, but maybe we should reach out to members of the administration or county council to see if there's any thought about tweaking the public ethics laws, or, you know, with the Schedule B or with Schedule D. I don't know. I mean, all I want to do is follow the law. And so that's what we're doing, the law as written. But there are, you know, questions that come up.
Yeah, I mean, well, you and I had talked about this. I think you should reach out to the state and find out if they have any guidance, because we have, anytime we change our law, we have to submit it to the state and they can reject it if it's not consistent with state law. We can be more rigid, but we can't be less rigid.
Right.
So,
Well, it's
I'd be
funny that
hesitant to make changes that conflict with state law.
Well, I think the other thing that's been interesting is this program is it's basically identical to the states, and there has been a lot of pushback on some of the questions and some of the language. And so I'm just kind of at a loss, and I don't know if this is, you know, frustration because nobody likes to file a financial disclosure, but, you know, my goal as your executive director is to, you know, encourage ethics education and to make these financial disclosures as easy and painless to do on both the back end as well as reviewing them on the front end. And that's all I'm trying to do.
I'd like to ask a question of Sue. I don't really expect you to know the answer necessarily, Sue, but like off the top of your head, but maybe this might trigger some, since you've been in the law department for a while. There are two different definitions in the code, one of interest and one of financial interest. And it seems like interest is the one that is used when talking about the disclosure statement, at least on the instructions for the disclosure statement, and it is more limited. Do you know anything about what the history is of having interest be used rather than financial interest?
I do not. Again, I think that might be a question to ask the state, because I assume that there's a reason that they were distinguished, because I noticed the same thing when I was fielding some questions.
Right. And I noticed also, see, because then I was going to have a second question. I say this only not to expect you now to know the answer to this, but more because if somebody puts this to the state, maybe this one can be put as well, that the amount in financial interest, for example, the example of $1,000 over 3 years, I wonder when that amount was set.
A long time ago,
Right.
as
And
I remember dealing with that when I worked for the state.
yeah. And so, you know, right. So I'm just pointing it out. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, very low amount.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess to me, it seems as though a first step of reaching out to the state would be a good thing. I don't know who is the appropriate person to do that. I don't know whether I want to say it should be Susan or Kelly, but I don't know whether my thought on that is correct. I see Susan is shaking her head rather than nodding, so I'm not sure.
Probably me. And I've had lots of conversations with Will Calhoun.
Okay.
He and I are friends, and I call him often. He's the one that helped me get the IT person access to the system, and I'm happy to kind of reach out to him. So, I mean, some of this I think is kind of like state ethics law specific.
Okay. I do think that getting the other form on is imperative.
I agree. Both of them.
And in my view, because otherwise you can have people who are over disclosing, and to the extent, for example, to the extent that somebody attaches a full printout, and maybe there's some PII on, I don't know. I'm against anything that could create a possibility of over disclosure. So that's my view, but I would like to hear from the other commissioners on that. But I'm just putting out there a suggestion by me of trying to see if we can't get a way to move expeditiously toward getting Form 2 placed online.
What are the
Since it-
obstacles in doing that right now?
The backlog at the Department of Information Technology, they're just overwhelmed. And right
Okay.
now they're trying to get Workday up and running for the county, and that's consuming a tremendous amount of their time.
So we are on their list. It's just.
We're on their list.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we're just not top priority.
So
Yeah.
when I sat down to meet with them, I mean, the original intention was to try to buy software off the shelf. It was too expensive. And then when we added the 250 employees to file, the county administrative officer was kind of like, oh, well, I mean, this is going to be a daunting task. And so IT did it, but they did it very quickly under limited circumstances. And I was told that they could only put one form up, which obviously the preference is Form 1 because it applies to more people. I think a letter of support from the Ethics Commission asking for it to be done as soon as practicable would be helpful.
Well, I would like to also if I can make another suggestion, I don't know whether in those initial conversations, whether the IT group had the opportunity to view the two forms. But we all know that Form 2 is kind of like a truncated Form 1. In other words, the initial questions are the same. And it's conceivable that they may think that Form 2 is sort of like different questions. I am hopeful, maybe it will turn out, that it's not a very large task, because it may be that the task is a task of deleting a lot of stuff, or consists in large part of deleting a lot of material. And it's possible, I'm just hoping, that maybe when they were thinking that it was a large task, right, that there may not have been a realization of that. They may have thought that they were two very different forms. So I just want to say that maybe if an approach is made, that perhaps they can be put side by side so that can be seen.
As the mother of two programmers, I can tell you that they still have to do a lot of coding because I'm working with them on some grants that we've done online. It's still a lot of work for IT. And I have regular meetings with Rob O'Connor, who's the director. So I'll continue to nag him.
Do you know if this is a coded platform as opposed to there is form software that is no coded platform, but do you know that this is a
I'm
coded
guessing
platform?
this is coded because there are drop down
Okay.
things. Yeah.
Well, in any event, I just
But
wanted
yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
just to see what we can find out.
right.
Is there a goal or a target date by which Form 2 needs to be online in order to be used for next year's reporting?
I'd say by January or February, wouldn't you think? That's when we usually start sending out the notices.
I mean,
I didn't know if
my
is there a
preference
requirement that anything happen before then that I'm not thinking of?
No, and my preference, frankly, would be the sooner the better, because people that leave a border commission have to file, and people
That's true.
do all the time, and people that join a border commission have to file. So frankly, I would prefer to have it up and running by July 1st, because I know June 30th, there's lots of turnover from the boards. And again, you know, so much of this process is manual. We have been working on having policies and procedures. I have been working with the county administrative officer to have onboarding and outboarding, you know, and email notifications, but we don't have any of that right now. So what's going to happen if it's not online until January, is you're going to have a lot of new board members and a lot of exiting board members that we don't necessarily care about filling out Form 2. So you're like never going to be able to get everybody online. That's the challenge. But I think a letter of support from the commission can't hurt. I mean, Sue can nag and I can, nag, but I think a letter of support, I don't know that the commission's ever done that before. I think that would have to be significant steps for them to see that there's obviously a need for this.
Cindy, would you feel comfortable writing that?
Sure. I think I would want to have, I would need information as to whom it goes and, right?
I would think it would go to Stacy Rogers, the AO.
So Susan, do you believe that this should be preceded by a phone call? Or followed up by a phone call? In other words, I guess I'm raising the issue of letter versus phone call.
I think you could do either.
Yeah.
It's hard to.
I mean, I know what Rob O'Connor is going to say. I just don't have the staff to do it. I mean, he says it all the time. But
Mike, have you chimed in?
You know, I wonder if there is such a thing as creating one form where the form would say, stop here if you're a Form 2 person.
I think that would be lovely, but frankly sounds to me more complicated.
Okay.
But it's worth exploring, You're also assuming that people are going to correctly mark the first box, where I have had a lot of employees that in their profile have said they're on a board or commission and they're not on a board or commission. So it's something new. I had these grand thoughts that it was going to just roll out perfectly, and I think, like probably any project, especially an IT project, it's been bumpy. It's been bumpy on the back end and it's been bumpy on the front end. But I think it's a step in the right direction. I don't know. This is probably a bad week to ask me.
Okay. So is there any,
change takes time, people have to get used to it.
looking on perhaps a a different note on all this, do you have any statistics or anything that you can report regarding how the compliance level looks right now as compared to where it looked several days after the deadline last year?
Ashley Lewandowski thinks that I should be patting myself on the back because out of 450 people-ish, probably more, we're only missing like 40. And in years past, that number had been much, much higher. And we also didn't start to send the emails out until February, not January. So given the bang for the buck of 3 months and how many people, Ashley, who's like Sue, been with the commission for a long, thinks it's been a smashing success. I frankly wanted everybody to file by April 30th. So we are not there. But, it's a challenge. I'll tell you though, when I started, I don't think we're going to get 100% this year. I think it's going to be too difficult because there's 15 employees that have left, and you kind of have to get the current board members or the current employees, you kind of have to get them to file before they leave. It's very, very difficult to get somebody to file after they've left the board or left their employment. We're gonna try. I mean, as of right now, I have 40 names. I assume by next meeting, I will come back and say, we've sent them letters, we've emailed them 3 or 4 times. Commission, what do you want to do? Do you want to sign them? Do you want to, what is the next step? Because I think at some point, we have to take enforcement action. I fortunately didn't have to do that last year. I threatened to go to the commission for like the last remaining 5 people, but I think the last person filed on May 30th of last year. So there's, this kind of wiggle room, but probably with 40 people, 40 plus, because that doesn't count the employees I don't have an email address for. Those are 40 emails I have to send out emails. There's probably an additional 15. I'm sure I'm going to have names for your consideration at the next meeting.
And we did have a conversation with Stacy about getting HR involved so that we don't have this problem going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've drafted, policies and procedures and documentation that when somebody leaves, other counties withhold their paychecks, they have that by statute, but we're going to try to set up things so that you can't walk out without having filed. It's kind of part of the checklist.
Okay, so I am going to, what I'm going to do is to draft a letter, which I will circulate to the other commissioners, and we'll see how that goes, and if we see if that all looks, once it's drafted, like a good way to proceed. And is there any other discussion regarding Kelly's report? And hearing none, we can move on to old business. Is there any old business other than what would be in closed session?
Not for me.
So from anyone else? Okay, so do I hear a motion to close the session?
I move to close the session.
Is there a second? Okay, Mike seconds. And we are going into close.
You have to poll everybody. You have to vote individually.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you so much, Susan, for doing that every single month. Thank you. So, Laura, are you in agreement to go into closed session?
I am.
Michael, are you in agreement? Michael, are you saying yes? Because I can't hear you.
Sorry, I forgot to hit the button. I agree.
Okay. And Elisa?
I agree.
All right. We are now going into closed session at 3:50 p.m.
So I'm stopping the WebEx recording.